Hello, everybody. Welcome to a live edition here today of Chase's Sports News. I am your host, Chase Coburn, here today. The big conversation when we had on Amanda Christovich of Front Office Sports back in October was, are college athletes going to be able to get paid directly by the schools? Well, with this new NCAA House v. NCAA settlement, we have now learned that they can. However, there are a lot of details that come along with it, and it is reshaping the future of college athletics. To learn more about how exactly it will, we are joined again by Amanda Christovich of Front Office Sports. Amanda, thanks for taking the time. How you doing?
I'm doing well. Never a slow news day.
It never is, and obviously this news coming kind of in the middle of nowhere in terms of a college basketball, college football season. So kind of just right when there's not as much to talk about, and as you said, there is no slow news day. Obviously, there's so much to break down here. We'll break down kind of the little parts of it, but overall, just give the audience a quick and simplified general overview of what this means for college athletics and student athletes.
Yeah, I think the most important thing about the House settlement, which was literally just approved about a month and 6 days ago on June 6th. So I think it's important to note like how new this is. Even though we knew a lot of the terms going in, we didn't have the we didn't have the confirmation until less than 2 months ago. The most important thing is, as you said, college athletes are going to get paid for playing their sport, which is something the NCAA has denied them the ability to do for pretty much its entire existence.
Right.
So those terms are $20.5 million per school for all of their athletes. That's the cap that the settlement offers. And that cap will increase incrementally every year, but that's going to be the cap. And players started getting paid 2 weeks ago on July 1st. So that's the biggest headline. There's also new scrutiny with NIL deals and a lot of new restrictions about what types of NIL opportunities are available to players in order to, quote, prevent them from being pay for play. And then there are a couple other parts of the settlement I did want to note I think are important. There's now no scholarship limits in Division I for any school that opts into these terms. So you can offer a full ride to every single player in your athletic department, every sport if you want to. But now there are roster limits, which has caused a lot of players to lose their spots, walk-ons, partial scholarship athletes. And they've tried to sort of fix that with an addendum to the settlement, but it's kind of unclear, how much of a fix that's really going to be. So those are like the macro points.
And I think obviously the other big one too is the back pay, the $2.8 billion that's now going to go to former college athletes. How necessary do you believe that is? Because I feel like in professional sports, when they change a rule, it's not like they're going to go back and fix it for everyone else who previously played. So how important do you think that is, and how necessary do you believe it was?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that's very necessary just, because this isn't a rule change that is being decided by the NCAA. This is the settlement of a legal proceeding, and back damages is a key component of what this settlement or what the case was originally arguing, that players had lost opportunities to make NIL money before these rules changed. And as a result of that, they deserve back damages. And so this is an antitrust suit. I don't need to get into the weeds of what that means, but the important thing to note there is the statute of limitations is 4 years. So that's why the cutoff is 2016, the 2016 season of which players or former players are eligible for these back damages. So while it may not be, really important for the NCAA rules, it was a key component of settling the legal proceeding.
Sure. Let's I think the other big part that you mentioned kind of in the general overview was how this is affecting the NIL landscape, which has kind of made college basketball and college football and all of these college athletics kind of a crapshoot in terms of the transfer portal. And I feel like that's even a different discussion. But the kind of NIL money is what has made this very difficult, and why we've seen coaches like Jay Wright and Nick Saban and Tony Bennett in particular just kind of say, like, look, I can't handle this anymore.
Right.
In 2021, the first year of NIL implementation, the athletes collectively earned $917 million. But now you said they're going to be more restrictions on it, but they're also now going to be getting paid. So I guess we'll offset. Overall, what does the future of this NIL landscape look like?
I mean, that is more unclear now than it was 4 days ago.
Right.
I can give you like a quick explanation of like what's been happening up to like literally this exact moment, because it's changing by the day, by the hour. So these new rules are supposed to say that these new restrictions are supposed to weed out any NIL deals that are supposed to be pay for play, or supposed to the groups of boosters and donors that created these entities called collectives to pay players NIL deals that really honestly ended up being recruiting inducements, right? Which is kind of why a lot of these coaches kind of said, you know what, I can't handle this, because between that and the unrestricted transfer portal, there's no salary caps, no nothing. So you're in an unrestricted free agency situation for every player every year, right? So that's what that created. Now there is a clearinghouse created by Deloitte. It's a software that you have to enter the terms of your deal into. Anything over $600 for every athlete in Division I has to enter these deals to get quote unquote approval for them. And they're looking at whether or not these deals are like true NIL, so like endorsement deals or events or promoting a brand, right? All of that stuff is kosher. But what isn't is deals that would be disguised as pay for play. Now, before the settlement actually passed, I, as well as many other folks in the collective space, were under the impression that collectives could still pay players. They just needed to make sure that they offered enough NIL opportunities that the money they were paying was justified from like a business perspective. So sure. Collectives will put together events like autograph signings, and they'll create exclusive content that you can pay a subscription fee for to talk to your players and get access to them, selling merchandise, all of these things, right? All of a sudden on Thursday, we find out the organization that's in charge of this new clearinghouse issues guidance that says, actually, NIL collective deals promoting anything that is like a product of the collective is not going to be approved. The collective can act as a marketing agent, right? To put like a brand can pay the collective for 20 players who are going to promote the brand, and then the collective can pass along that money to the players. But the collective itself can't make money or can't pay players for promoting things that the collective puts together without outside brands. So now everyone's wondering, what is the future of collectives? And I'm giving you a long answer to your question to explain that like literally nobody knows at this point because of what happened on Thursday.
And I think the biggest thing too of how it was affecting how NIL was just kind of this entire crazy thing is that they were getting paid, but again, there was no regulation to it. You mentioned kind of the unrestricted free agency part. When I was credentialed for the MAC tournament, MAAC tournament for basketball, and teams like Iona and teams like Mount St. Mary's that were in the championship game, they were talking about how they're going to lose their entire roster next year because they're going to go to bigger opportunities. They're going to make more money. I kind of want to just ask you mentioned the $20.5 million salary cap. I assume that's not going to be the case at the mid-major level. How is kind of everything working in terms of mid-major schools in these sports that are also going to try to compete?
I think mid-majors and basketball-centric schools actually have a huge opportunity with the settlement, because think of it this way. The revenue sharing cap for everybody, no matter how rich of a school you are, is $20.5 million. And if you're an FBS football team, if you're a power conference football team, 75% of that revenue sharing is probably going to go to your football team. That's how much money most of the schools, that seems to be the like consensus number, right?
Sure.
So then you only have 25% of $20 million to give to your men's and women's basketball programs and any other team. You don't have to give it to all the teams, but any other team you think will need this from a recruiting perspective. But if you're a basketball centric school, like, I'm a Georgetown girl, so let's look at the Big East.
Sure, yeah.
If you are, a Villanova, right? You don't have FBS football. So you don't even have to come up with $20.5 million. You can come up with $10 million or less, and you can still offer more in revenue sharing to your men's and women's basketball programs than the power conferences can, not because you're richer, but because the cap is for everybody and they have a football team to pay for and you don't. So I'm not saying the power conferences won't be able to compete. They always find a way, but It's a huge opportunity for these basketball centric schools.
Right, and you even again kind of look down at the mid-major level, and hopefully, I mean, this year in March Madness, it was unprecedented how little upsets there were in the tournament. Now, if
Right.
these schools can provide more funding to their basketball programs, that can maybe allow for some more upsets and some more madness in the tournament that we do call March Madness. So that will definitely, I think, affect a lot of things. I guess the main problem for me that I have with this whole landscape, forget even the settlement, but even with just NIL in general, is I feel like now college athletes are having too much power. I look at the NBA draft and I see that Ace Bailey and Colin Murray Boyles were taken in the NBA draft and were visibly upset by being selected at a higher position than they wanted to because they wanted to be in a specific team and a specific system. And I feel like you're getting these like prima donnas now coming from college athletics. Do you believe now players have too much power and are now going into professional sports and thinking that they do?
I don't think so, honestly, just because I don't think they have as much power as the sort of high level NIL world would lead you to believe, right? Like from an actual, like they don't have a union, they don't have the ability to collectively bargain. So just from kind of a clinical standpoint, they still don't have the same amount of power as professional athletes do. Do they have a bigger voice than ever before? Do they, I think especially in the NBA draft, I mean, look, like because of NIL, I wrote about this right before the NBA draft. Because of NIL, if you're not guaranteed a roster spot on an NBA team, you don't have to be begging for a two-way contract. You don't have to be begging for a G League contract. So they absolutely have a lot more agency and power in like a draft situation than they ever have. So they can be greedy, right? So that may have been where that those emotions came from. But I really think that unless players in college have a union and the ability to collectively bargain, they're never going to have the amount of power that I think, they believe. I'm not saying collective bargaining is the right answer. I'm not like, I'm a reporter. I'm not like putting out an answer to that. But I do think that players, they're making money, but they're still getting injured and not getting compensated for those injuries, right? So like there are protections that something like a union, some sort of collective player's voice could offer them that they're not getting right now. So while maybe on the individual level, some of them are, they have more power and influence than ever, like as a collective group, I still don't think they do.
Amanda Christovich of Front Office Sports joining us, everybody, to learn more about the House NCAA settlement case. I think that we're talking about maybe all this not kind of fighting for that extra two-way spot. Do you think that's good overall for the player? Like, shouldn't they always just want to go for like whatever they think they can reach instead of kind of just staying like, oh yeah, I'll stay back in college and make more money? I don't know. I just feel like now it's like they're not really maybe pushing and striving themselves to reach the highest level anymore.
I mean, look, the agents I spoke with, at the very least, they said it's a great thing from a negotiating perspective. And I think the other thing to note is that there are so many players overall, like when I was in high school and middle school, players would jump to the NBA draft when they weren't ready because they needed the money. Or they were so adamant about just getting to the NBA. That was all they ever wanted, right? But they weren't ready. And then they went through the draft, didn't get drafted, so they couldn't go back to school. They couldn't get their degree. They couldn't, set up a future. And then they toiled away, go in overseas, like trying to make a career for themselves, in many cases, not making a lot of money. And then, 10 years later, they don't even have a college degree because they left college after 2 years. So I think that scenario is a lot less common. And I think that's a good thing for players because the vast majority of them are not going to make the NBA.
Right.
So to give them the opportunity to have 4 years, make some money, get a degree, take their chances. And like, if that doesn't work out, at least like they majored in something, at least they have career opportunities. I think for those players who are really high up there, they're going to be striving for the NBA no matter what. I think any player who has an opportunity to make it to the NBA is going to make it. And I did talk to agents who said that there are players who they're less concerned about the money and they're more concerned about like, I just want to get to the NBA. So like a two-way contract might be good for them because it might be enough money for them to live on, and that's just their dream. I think it's really a case-by-case basis.
So you just mentioned how some players maybe aren't prioritizing the financial aspect as greatly. And to me, I guess when everything happened here with this settlement, I guess that was my biggest concern for actually the college athletes, because oftentimes it is oftentimes generational money for, kids and athletes who grew up not having a lot to be able to make a lot of money in college. That's obviously a huge win for them. But I guess that what the concerning element is are they just going to prioritize maybe a few years worth of money instead of the long-term benefit that could come from going to the right school and getting the right education? Do you believe athletes are focusing too much on the short-term dollar amount instead of maybe the long-term benefit?
It's hard to say, because what was influencing their decisions before, there were other recruiting incentives, right? It's not like this is the first time there have been recruiting incentives. So it's hard to say, like, before they were prioritizing education and now they're not. I think that money is a remarkable incentive, and that I think, I would actually argue that players are working harder because there is something clear and attainable for them to strive for beyond just the NBA draft, which, less than 10% of them will ever actually get to. If you have no chance of making the NBA draft, but you have a chance of making six figures, I mean, I would work harder, right? That's why they have bonuses in the corporate world, because it's a remarkable incentive. So I think that it's really hard to say what one recruiting advantage may or may not be a good influence. Obviously, there's no secret that players are going where they're going to get the money, but they have agents, they have parents. Like, some players are only going to think about money, and that's going to, come back to haunt them in the future. Other players are considering multiple factors and their sort of broader future, especially because they have smart people around them. And, maybe they don't go to the school that offers them the most money, but they go to a school that offers them enough and other benefits, that they think are going to be good for them in the long term. So it's really hard to say. Again, it's a case-by-case thing. It's so tough, especially when there are thousands of athletes in Division I, and it's so different for all of them.
So you just mentioned how maybe you spoke with some of the athletes, some agents. What have been the response from coaches? What are their thoughts on everything? Because we talked about maybe some of the coaches that left because of the unregulated NIL system. What are their thoughts now on this new system?
You know what's interesting about the coaches, especially this has been the case with football coaches recently, they're really interested in this concept of collective bargaining, because they are sick of unrestricted free agency, understandably. They are sick of having to recruit an entire new team every year, 365 days a year. They are sick of
like general managers. Now these schools have general managers and front offices to have to handle this stuff as well.
100%. They're sick of that. They want rules, they want regulations, they want salary caps, they want free agency restrictions, just like there are in the pros. And they understand that the best or the way to do that already exists in our economic system is collective bargaining with a union. So, coaches in college basketball and football have come out to say, hey, like, what is the problem with making the players employees and allowing them to collectively bargain if that's going to give us more power as coaches to, or the NCAA or whomever, to set rules and restrictions and regulations that are legally defensible, that won't be challenged, right? The players are already being fired. That's the other thing. They're already being treated like employees. They already have more control exerted over them than, I do at Front Office Sports, and I'm an employee of Front Office Sports. Front Office Sports doesn't tell me when to wake up in the morning, what to eat for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, how much I have to weigh. Those are all things that count in our legal system towards conceptualizing employment. So the coaches are really kind of interested in this collective bargaining idea, because they're like, a way to set rules that won't be challenged in court. Like, we're down. Let's just do it. Like, we don't care, So that's kind of something interesting that I've started to see a lot of over the past year.
What are maybe some of the rumors or things you've heard of possible ways that this will be regulated? Have you heard anything about a collective bargaining, or are there other ways you think this will be regulated?
Well, there's a way the NCAA wants it to be regulated in the sort of conference levels, or the administrators at the conference level are fighting in Congress to get a law passed that will literally create a new legal framework that will protect the NCAA and whoever ends up, running all of this. That will protect them from lawsuits if they set rules on, restrictions on compensation and transfer portal rules and all of that. Like, they acknowledge that collective bargaining is the way to go, but they're so against athletes being employees that the only solution is to literally ask Congress to write them a new law because what they're doing is not legal, or what they want to do is not legal. So that's what they're trying to do. They want to keep the athletes from being employees. They want to keep them from being able to collectively bargain. They want to take the power to be able to keep the athletes as they are and just set the rules that they want to set. That's what they're doing in Congress. Collective bargaining is the other option. There's a third option, which is sort of like non-employee union, like a players association, a coalition of players that like isn't a union. But the problem with that is like there's no legal power for that entity. So if like the NCAA doesn't listen to them, there's nothing they can really do about it in the way they could if it was a union. So those are the kind of like options that are being looked at. Congress is not moving very quickly on this issue, but neither are the courts in terms of whether or not athletes could be deemed employees. So it's funny. It's a very slow race right now to see who wins. Let's put it that way.
But it's interesting because you mentioned, are they deemed employees? They're probably being not even treated like employees, even more than that, because you mentioned that they have more rules that they have to follow than a regular employee like yourself. So how likely do you think it is that these big conferences win that battle?
I don't think it's likely at all. That's not necessarily because, I think you're looking at it as a logical person, but politics isn't logical. But that's still not the reason, you know what I mean? It's like, I don't think it's not going to be successful because their position is illogical. I think it wouldn't be successful because the way that our political system is right now, it's so divided. Especially when Trump gets involved in anything, if he endorses anything, the Democrats are automatically going to oppose it, whether it's a good idea or not. Right. So I think in order to pass a law, you need 7 Democrats to sign on to it in the Senate, and you're not going to get that. You're not going to get the wish list that the NCAA and the conferences are asking for. You're not going to get enough Democrats to sign on to that at this point, as far as my sources in Congress tell me. So I really don't think it's very likely at this point, but obviously that could change in the future.
A lot can change. It feels like there have been even a lot more moving parts since the 1 month and 6 days ago that the settlement was, or this case was finally settled. And we'll, I'm sure, learn a lot more in the future. Guys, be sure to look up or follow Amanda on Twitter. Check out her work with Front Office Sports. She does a ton of incredible stuff. Thank you so much for joining us here on the show to speak about this issue, because there's so much that comes along with it, and we appreciate you for taking the time.
Yeah, anytime. Thank you so much for having me. It's good to see you.
It was great to see you as well. We're going to wrap this one up here. Thank you all so much for watching. Again, for some of you who came on late, or maybe we're on early, if you could not watch the full thing live, it will be reposted on the channel in just a few minutes after this. So please be sure to stay tuned for that. Signing off here from Chase's Sports News. I am your host, Chase Coburn. Have an incredible week, Chase's Sports News fans.